Hello and thank you for viewing this video in which I will be discussing my plans for my Blood Angels army in 8th edition Warhammer 40,000. My name is Steve, this is the SDFnet 40k channel, and let us begin. Now before I begin, this review will be split into 10 sections covering the different elements. This coverage will then be further split into 2 videos to alleviate the magnitude of having to listen to me waffle on for too long in a single sitting. Today will be parts 1 to 5, with the remaining 6 to 10 parts published next Monday. First up, why did I choose Blood Angels? Those of you who have been following my blog for a while will be aware of my plans regarding my Grand Imperial Soup army that I've been working towards. However, for those who aren't aware, I build each of my armies to operate as a self-contained force, but also to perform a function within a combined 40,000 point Imperial army. Being a self-contained force, this does mean there will be overlap to other armies and elements in armies that don't play specifically to the faction archetype that I was going for, but are present for the purpose of tabletop viability. The biggest single force within this army is easily my Dark Angels. However, each element of the combined force is intended to play thematically to their narrative strengths. For example, Catachans, that I have previously discussed on the blog, are there to provide armour support and cheap chaff infantry. Grey Knights are there as anti-chaos, anti-demon. Deathwatch, the same but for Xenos, and so on. I recognise that the Dark Angels wouldn't be too happy with that amount of Inquisition around, because secrets, but the broad narrative I have in my head gets around that, and the necessity demands cooperation. Of the various armies I had planned for this force, I noted there was one element missing, that of a fast-moving, assault-focused strike force, as close combat is indeed the most honourable form of combat. Sure, there are elements in virtually all armies that can perform that function, but no faction that identifies with rapid, decisive melee strikes. That is obviously where the Blood Angels come in. It is worth mentioning that the Space Wolves were the other frontrunner to fulfill this role, and I do like the model range and the concept of Space Vikings, but I couldn't reconcile myself with the clash with the Dark Angels lore-wise. I originally put together this force in 7th edition, building around the Angel's Blade formations, and using Blood Angels specific models, so I may have a lot of models that seem like a bizarre mix now. I focused the 7th edition list on fast movement, deep striking and melee. With the advent of Primaris Marines, I've been able to thematically fill in gaps in the new detachment structures as troop requirements, as previously I only had Tactical Marines and Scouts. The Blood Angels Tactical Marine kit is great, however I did not want another 30 Tactical Marines doing the exact same job as the 60 Tactical Marines from Dark Angels. Blood Angels have suffered for rules for a while. They were running an extremely outdated Codex until 7th, and then what they got, basically sucked in terms of competitiveness. In the addition of formations and formations of formations, the poor sons of Sanguinius were left behind. The Blood Angels were featured in some campaign books, but their redemption didn't really come until the Angel's Blade book. I know some competitive players still didn't like the book, but for me, it gave enough rules and narrative composition to convince me to take the plunge with the Red Angels as a solution to the missing fighty element of my Imperial Soup. Next, let's move on to my thoughts on the lore progression. Fair warning, potential spoilers ahead. So, the end of 7th left the Blood Angels in a bit of a spot. The Tyrannid High Fleet Leviathan had set its mind to eliminating the Blood Angels and was assaulting Baal. In response to this threat, Commander Dante had recalled as many possible Blood Angels and successor chapters for the defence of the home system, effectively reforming a legion. Such was the response to the summons. Even the Knights of Blood chapter, who had been declared excommunicare traitoris by the High Lords of Terror, answered the call to defend the home of their Genefather. I'm not aware of a single gathering of Astartes like this since the heresy. Not even the last wall protocol of the Imperial Fists in Beast Arises series gathered as many Marines from subsequent foundings back under the direct control of a single commander. Even this prodigious gathering of Imperial might was not enough. The Blood Angels were losing. The inexorable tide of chitin and claws was wearing down the embattled defenders. I believe 11 chapter masters fell in total, and whole chapters were wiped out, or at least reduced to a point where they would have been decommissioned by the Imperial of old. The defense of Baal was a masterpiece in strategic prowess. An act of heroism and sacrifice worthy of immortalization was seen again and again, but the Tyranids were too many and the Blood Angels too few, and slowly but surely the defenders were ground back until Dante ordered the retreats to the fortress monastery, where they would make their final stand. It was then the great rift, the Cicatrix Maledictum, tore the skies above Baal asunder. Warp storms and etheric lightning cracked. Stars were obliterated from the heavens, and to those valiant defenders led by Commander Dante, it was surely an omen of the end times. After a time, the storms besieging the skies, as the Xenos menace besieged the Imperial forces on the ground, abated. While numerically Leviathan's forces outnumbered the Imperials 100 to 1. With the recession of the warp storm, the advance of the Tyranids faltered. Disarray befell the swarms as they seemed to lose their cohesive drive. This would not be enough to save the Red Angels. As the final lines of the defense were breached by the Tyranid forces, redemption came to Baal. Into the void of space above the Blood Angels' homeworld translated a massive Imperial fleet. The Indomitus Crusade had come to Baal, led by none other than the returned Ultramarines Primarch Rabuti Guilliman. The hive fleets that had swallowed Baal and its moons like some monolithic creature of nightmare had vanished. Only the, albeit overwhelming, forces planetside remained, and they were on the brink of ultimate success. Living up to his moniker, the Avenging Sun, Guilliman descended at the head of a new legion of Astartes warriors. These were the Primaris Marines, the new archetype for the Adeptus Astartes. The wrath of the Primarch and his forces, combined with the now reinvigorated defenders, saw the wholesale slaughter of every Xenos bioform on the planet. After the battle was won, Guilliman gifted the Blood Angels and successor chapters the reinforcements they would need to form his Crusade army, to return them to fighting strength. The Blood Angels were needed in the battles to come. In recognition of his service to the Imperium and achievements, Commander Dante was appointed as Lord Regent of Imperium Nihilus, essentially putting him in charge of all military operations of the Dark Imperium. Of what happened to the hive fleet of Leviathan, no one can be sure. The only clue was found on the barren moon of Baal Prime, where Tyranid skulls were found piled impossibly high, and formed to the shape of the Blood Angels' ancient enemy, Khorne, and more specifically, the bloodthirster Ka'Bandha, who had fought Sanguinius himself for the souls of the Legion so long ago. This was clearly a message intended to mean that Khorne considered the souls of Sanguinius' gene line to belong to him, and Ka'Bandha that if anyone was going to kill the Blood Angels, it would be him. As far as 8th edition story progression goes, I personally feel the Blood Angels fared quite favourably. The Tyranid threat was well played, showing for all the might and genius of the Blood Angels, the doom of the Hive Fleet is inexorable. It would have been all too easy to say, simply set out the story that Dante mounted a valiant defence and slew all the Xenos. I like it that the Tyranids were actually given some credit, for once, for being the true galactic threat that they are. They are so often sidelined or defeated, just because Space Marines. My favourite part of the story is that we didn't get yet another Guilliman the Unstoppable superhero moment, where he swoops in and single-handedly saves the losing Imperial force. I personally believe that had not fate intervened, nobody, not even Guilliman himself, could have won the defence of Baal. It's pretty well acknowledged that only the mastery of Dante kept the Imperial defenders from falling long ago. Many lesser commanders would not have achieved this. I don't object to Guilliman and the Primaris Marines undertaking the mopping up action. At that point the battle was basically over. While the Blood Angels would have lost without support, any Imperial reinforcements would have done the job. it wasn't specifically Guilliman or specifically the Primaris Marines that saved the day. I like it also that Dante, who is near enough the most widely respected Astartes in the galaxy, was recognised for this. Guilliman seemed to treat Dante with more respect than he even did Manius Calgar, his own chapter's chapter master. Dante deserved this, and while in the expanded fluff it is stated that he doesn't want the responsibility, he's old and he's tired, and he basically just wants to die so he can rest now, the needs of the Imperium means he sacrifices his personal desire for yet more burden of being in charge of the defence of fully half of the Imperium. I think this speaks really well to his character of self-sacrifice. The devastation of the gene lineage of the Blood Angels creates one of the less shoehorned in Dark Angels reasons for Primaris reinforcements, and the reason that they would be accepted into the folds of the chapter. The Blood Angels gene line would lead the fight in the Imperium Nihilus, or the Dark Imperium, on the far side of the Great Rift. They would not have the time nor resources to return the required strength for that fight under traditional means. That they were granted the pre-made, ready-to-go reinforcements is the only logical solution to allow Blood Angels to fulfill their designated role and the majority of the narrative force in the fate of the Imperium to come. I'll end this review with a speculative question, and that is with regard to how the appointment of Dante and the Blood Angels, being the leading military force in the Dark Imperium, will be affected by the return of the next Loyalist Primarch. I won't go into long speculation as to who I think it might be. I've covered that discussion at length on my blog. Long story short, I believe it to be Lionel Johnson of the Dark Angels. The Dark Angels are also located in Imperial Nihilus, so technically they now fall under the jurisdiction of Dante. If and when the line returns, will that spell Dante's demotion, with the line taking over as leader of the military forces of Imperium Nihilus, with Guilliman in charge of the main Imperium? I can't really see the line reporting to Dante as his superior. However much respect Dante deserves, the Lion isn't really socially adjusted enough to swallow his pride and report to a standard Astartes. I will now move on to section 3, which is the faction special rules. First up, Red Thirst. This states that in any turn in which a unit with this ability charges or performs a heroic intervention, that unit may add 1 to the result of any wound roll in the fight phase. Now, as a core chapter tactic that applies to most things in the Codex, I really like this. It plays well to the narrative flavour of Blood Angels and supports my army well. If you were playing a gunline ranged shooty army, it wouldn't be nearly as useful, but in fairness, if you're doing that, you're playing Blood Angels wrong. Next up, we have Defenders of Humanity. This states that a unit with this ability that is within range of an objective marker controls that objective, even if there are a greater number of opposing models. If 2 opposing units have this rule, or a similar rule, the point is considered to be contested. In terms of previous editions, this is objective secured. This is a welcome return from the initial launch of 8th edition, as elite factions such as Astartes were unable to contest objectives versus cheaper swarm factions. Then we have And They Shall Know No Fear, which allows you to re-roll failed morale tests for a unit with this rule. Frequently referred to as And They Shall Know No Rules, this helps keep your Marines in the fight. I think this is a good way of representing the drilled and stalwart nature of Astartes, but still allows the possibility of failing the roll. Next up, Jump Pack Assault. During deployment, you can place a model with this rule in reserve. At the end of your movement phase, you can opt to place this unit anywhere on the battlefield that is more than 9 inches away from any enemy unit. Deep striking jump packs? Really, what's not to like? Well, I mean, it's not deep striking a Land Raider, which for those unaware is something that Blood Angels were able to do in previous editions, but they're taking victories where they can be found. My army is very much focused on speed, so this ability is very useful. In 7th edition, when the army was originally conceived, every unit that could take a jump pack did. A number of the list builds actually had nil deployment at the start of the battle. The final rule I'm going to look at is Black Rage. Models with this rule gain +1 attack in the fight phase if they charged in the previous charge phase. In addition, roll a d6 each time a model with this rule loses a wound. On a 6, that damage is ignored. This basically provides the same bonuses that the Death Company used to receive. This rule is natively found on Death Company units, so it could simply have been rolled into their rules, but there are options to extend this ability to other units with stratagems and the like, so I suppose that's why it was listed as a separate rule. And Blood Angels Tactica 101 ABC, always be charging. Section 4 of this video will be covering the Warlord traits. Let's kick things off with Speed of the Primarch. This allows you to always choose your Warlord to fight first in the fight subphase, even if they didn't charge. If the enemy has units that have charged or have a similar ability, alternate activations starting with the player whose turn it is. For a melee-focused army such as Blood Angels, and how I have tailored my forces, the ability to strike first in combat, or at least after the first charging unit, could be useful. I'm not sure the attacks of a single character would be enough to swing the outcome of a combat against a whole squad of attackers, and if it is a multi-unit combat and the enemy knows that one of your combatants has this ability, that will mean that the principal focus for the attacks of the first chargers will be your Warlord in order to prevent him from interrupting the attacks of the subsequent chargers. I feel this trait is okay and nice to have, but it wouldn't be my first choice. Next up is Artisan of War. Add 1 to the damage characteristic of one weapon carried by a Warlord, excluding Relics of Baal. I could see this trait being useful on characters such as chaplains leading a Death Company army. Improving the middle-of-the-road Crozius could only help combat resolution. Alternatively, buffing a Thunderhammer to do a flat 4 damage could be nice for a Terminator HQ. That said, whilst it's not bad, I don't really feel any enthusiasm for this trait. Next, we have Soul Warden. You can attempt to resist 1 psychic power with your Warlord, or 1 additional power if your Warlord already possesses this ability. The ability to deny a crucial psychic power could be useful in an army. I'm not shy of bringing librarians, especially of the Dreadnought variety, but they would not fit into every list design I may desire. For example, using that pure Death Company list again. Blocking that debuff on your Death Company squad before they charged and being able to retain the narrative theme of the list would be a nice boon. I would say this trait is probably situational. If you already have Psychic Defense, there are other more useful traits and you'd be hedging your bets that you'll be facing psychic threats to begin with. If your enemy doesn't bring any space magic, it nullifies this trait completely. Now we're going to look at Heroic Bearing. This trait allows units that are within 6 inches of your Warlord to automatically pass morale tests. In terms of older edition, this basically is a 6-inch fearless bubble, and that's always welcome. Locate your Warlord between 2 squads and you can keep them both in the fight to the very last man, which can be helpful for locking up enemies or grinding them down in a protracted combat, for example. The next trait is Gift of Foresight. Roll a d6 each time your Warlord loses a wound, re-rolling rolls of 1. On a 6, that wound is ignored. If your Warlord also has the Black Rage ability, increase the effect to 5+, but the similar ability to ignore wounds from Black Rage has no effect. While possibly one of the less exciting traits, and one that doesn't play to the aggressive combat theme of my armies, this may be the most useful trait, as anything to keep your Warlord alive and deny the victory point for killing him is welcome. It's not like I would be hiding my Warlord away at the back in a Blood Angel's army. He's always going to be right up there in the thickest of the fighting, looking for glory. Next up, Selfless Valor. Your Warlord can perform a heroic intervention if he is within 6 inches of an enemy unit instead of only 3. If he does this, he may move up to 6 instead of 3 inches. While this has situational use, I feel this is perhaps the weakest of the Warlord traits. It might mean that you can keep your Warlord 6 inches further away from whatever squad he's currently supporting and or using as a meat shield, but it means you're going to be at least 3 inches further away from the enemy, meaning that if you wanted to charge, it would be making that task harder. For me, I'm going to want to get as many people as I can, as close as I can, in order to mitigate failed charges. I've failed far too many 9-inch charges from Deep Strike, and subsequently had my Death Company or Sanguinary Guard annihilated for being out in the open. In summary, there are no objectively bad traits to be found in the Codex, and while many of them do play to the combative theme of Blood Angels, I equally feel there aren't any standout, exciting traits either. The safest choice, in my opinion, is probably to go for Gift of Foresight, but any of them have potential to be effective if the battle provides the opportunity. And finally, we move on to the Relics of Baal. First up, the Hammer of Baal. This replaces a Thunderhammer with the same stats and profile, but removes the -1 to hit penalty. Possibly the only to be seen on a Terminator Captain if I were to bring this relic. It is good as it takes an existingly powerful weapon and simply removes the penalty for it, something you really can't argue with. However, Thunderhammers are expensive, and on anyone but a Terminator involves sacrificing your secondary armament. If I were to play a full Terminator list, I might take this upgrade. Next, the Angel's Wing. This replaces a jump pack and provides all the same base rules, but with the addition that it grants the ability to reroll failed charge rolls and prevents the enemy from being able to fire Overwatch at the bearer of this relic. This relic I like very much. The rerolling charges is helpful, but not something I would take this relic for on its own. Combined, however, with the most excellent inability to be overwatched, and you have an extremely powerful bonus, and with the reroll charge distance in addition, this doubles your chances of making the charge. Putting this on, for example, a Death Company Chaplain, it would let him negate the overwatch, thus protecting the 1 to 2 squads of Death Company, who can then hammer into the enemy without risk of potential losses. I've lost in the past 3 of a 5-man squad to Overwatch before they managed to get in, and this really blunts the strike. Next up, the Veritas Vitae. If your army is battle-forged, and the bearer of this relic is on the battlefield, roll a d6 each time you use a stratagem. On a 5+, you gain back a command point. Probably the best all-round relic available given the expensive and elite nature of Astartes armies. Command points are a scarce luxury, so the ability to mitigate their expenditure is welcome, even if it is only a 33% chance of doing so. It is unfortunate that this relic is objectively weaker to similar iterations of this rule seen elsewhere, as this grants 1 command point potential per stratagem, be that a 1 or a 3 cost stratagem. Other instances of this rule have granted the return per command point spent, meaning a 3-point stratagem had the potential to restore 3 command points. Still, 1 is better than none, so this is still going to be my go-to relic. Next up, we have Galean Staff, and excuse the pronunciation if that's not right. This replaces a Force Staff with the same stats, but grants the wielder +1 to the Psyche test if manifesting Smite. Whilst this is a simple outright improvement to a Force Staff, and Smite is a widely used ability, to be honest, aside from the very largest of games, the spells cast by my usual single Space Wizard will be ones chosen from the sanguinary discipline, the smite only being the backup when there is literally nothing else he can do due to previous casts of abilities or available targets. Whilst this is not a bad relic, I really don't see myself taking it, as I believe putting the Veritas Vitae on the same librarian would yield a greater battlefield result than casting Smite on a 4-up, which could then be denied. Next we have the Archangel's Shard. This replaces a power sword or a mastercrafted power sword with the same stats, but if the target of the attacks made with this weapon has the monster keyword, the damage characteristic is increased to D3, and if the target is a demonic monster, its damage characteristic is increased to D6. While thematically fitting, basically being designed for when you fight a bloodthirster, generally I think this is the weakest relic, as the bonuses are simply too specific for my liking. Finally, we have the Standard of Sacrifice, which is available to ancient models only, and grants a 6-inch aura, in which Blood Angels infantry or bike units ignore wounds on a 5+. Note that this does not stack with the Black Rage ability. Echoing my sentiments regarding the Gift of Foresight Warlord trait, I feel no pain bubble is always a safe bet to have. However, in my case you will see very limited use to this, due to the fact that neither the company nor Primaris Ancient can take a jump pack, which means they will never be with the rest of the infantry, who will either deep strike or simply outpace the foot-slogging Ancient. I could see this being used on a Terminator Ancient perhaps, as he would be able to deep strike with the rest of the forces he is intending to buff. And that is all of the relics, and that is this video. Remember to check back next Monday for part 2 of this review, where I will look at my top 5 stratagems, discuss the sanguinary discipline, and get into my army in depth. That's me done. I hope you appreciate your taking the time to listen to me ramble on. I hope you enjoyed the content and would welcome your constructive feedback and discussion. If you like this video, please like and share it, and if you like the content in general, please subscribe to this channel. Both help me in knowing what's working. I have been Steve, this has been the STFnet 40k channel, and I will see you next time. The Emperor protects.